What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with my Season 2 mid-season finale review for Invincible, and there will be spoilers, but we got to come up with a shorter way to describe the mid-season finale of a season before Season 2 returns in 2024. It's just kind of a mouthful. At any rate, I think the response to this episode should be rather robust and enthusiastic, but who the hell knows? I'm actually recording this review a couple days in advance. Today is only Saturday, November 18th, so maybe between now and Thursday next week, everybody will turn their backs on Invincible, but I don't think that's going to be the case because, in my opinion, of all the comic book adaptations going on right now in the world of film and television, I'm going to go out on a limb and describe Invincible as kind of the keeper of the flame. And what do I mean by the keeper of the flame? There's so many shows and movies and franchises that have drifted away from their roots and the stories that made them cool in the first place, the stories that made them unique and original. And I feel like there's so many franchises now like Marvel where they take the names, they take a few titles, but they basically are just making bland, interchangeable, generic, crappy shows and movies. But Invincible still feels like a faithful and loving adaptation of the comics, created by Robert Kirkman, Cory Walker, and Ryan Ottley. And this trade paperback right here, Volume 6, which is issues 25 to 30, if you've read it, they basically took the best scenes and the best moments and they turned it into a really cool, bloody, gruesome episode of television called It's Been a While. And that's a great title for the episode. After that line at the end of episode 3, which I was relieved to see episode 3 was trending on Twitter. I was like, yeah, this show, it went away for too long, but people seem to be rediscovering it. But this episode was written by Helen Lee and directed by Jason Zurich. And no news yet on when part 2 of season 2 is going to be coming in 2024. But I hope people will get caught up on this show and just recognize that like the superhero genre has lost its way in so many aspects, because it's failing to exploit and capitalize on what makes these stories cool in the first place. Why make superheroes as bland and generic as any other kind of Hollywood disposable product? Like, try and remember why there are, like, hordes of fans who were investing hours upon hours into reading these stories. And like I said before, Invincible is the keeper of the flame. And I don't know if there are enough readers and writers and filmmakers out there who still love the core of what makes superheroes special to help the genre make a comeback. But if not, it had a good run. We got a few good adaptations of some indie comics, a few good adaptations of some big superhero comics. I'm not ready to say goodbye to the superhero genre. However, if all we're going to get is more crap for Disney Plus, then I will move on. I'll read spy thrillers by Jean Le Carré. I'll read fantasy novels by some maniac. I'll play video games. Like, there are other forms of escapist entertainment, other genres that are going to give me the kind of the vitality and the excitement and the violence and the thrills that a show like Invincible is willing to give, even if Marvel and DC seem to be struggling right now. So even as the big two are crashing and burning on the big screen and the small, I suspect that if you're a kid or a teenager right now in 2023 and you're lucky enough to have seen this show, this episode 4, would be as thrilling as being a kid back in 1980 and seeing Superman 2 on the big screen. Superman 2 is probably the first example where we got to see extremely powerful people beating the fuck out of each other. And I have no idea how well that movie would play for a young audience today. But throughout the 80s, every time it came on HBO, I was like, fuck yeah, I'm in. Like, kneel before Zod, all that good stuff. And like this episode, you had 4 superpowered people in a knockdown, drag-out brawl. There was 1 versus 3. Here we got 2 versus 2, and it did not disappoint. Or actually, 2 versus 3, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's slow down and start at the beginning. So I went back and rewatched my press screener of this episode before doing my spoiler review, and I might have liked it even more the second time around because I appreciated just how intense and just how visceral and just how comic books accurate the violence was. And I think that's something that's totally been lost. I don't want to turn this into like an expose or like, a funeral for the big two, but if you're going to deliver superpowered violence on the big or small screen, the punches need to matter. Like, if somebody's strong enough to pick up a building, when they hit somebody or throw their elbow into something or throw their knee into something, the impact should be devastating. We should see jaws coming off. We should see skulls getting rearranged. Like, it should be as gruesome as humanly possible. Like, if Spider-Man punches somebody, they're not just going to go, oh, that you got me. Like, their face is going to implode because he is a superpowered individual. And this is one of the only shows that really gets that right. And another thing this show gets right, it allows us to fall in love with complex villains that have nuance and dimensions to their character, because Omni-Man is a murderous, almost like genocidal sociopath in so many ways. But I bet the majority of the viewers of episode 4 felt sympathy for him as he was flying off into space with tears running down his face as he leaves Mark behind. And we get this great little flashback where we see what happened to him after he flew away from Earth at the end of season 1. And we see him, I can't remember the name of these little insect creatures, but he saves a ship that's floating into a sun, takes them to their home planet, and he basically gets adopted as like their benevolent dictator. I don't know to what degree he's kind of running their affairs. But it's incredible seeing how this show is willing to give us complex villains that we're allowed to root for. Like, part of the success of Avengers Infinity War was that they made Thanos awesome. Granted, he was trying to murder half the universe, but he was a fucking badass, and you could get on his side and you could see things from his point of view. And that's another thing that's been lost by Marvel, is the idea of actually allowing us to hardcore root for really savage, evil characters. And obviously it helps when you have J.K. Simmons providing incredible voice work. J.K. Simmons was perfectly cast here. But Steven Yeun, he was very well cast as well. I mean, the whole cast is incredible. I think Kevin Michael Richardson as the Mer Twins, he might be my favorite character. And Marvel on its best day can't give us characters that entertaining. Or seeing Clancy Brown's voice popping up at the end. I mean, I love the voice acting talent that they've been bringing in. But J.K. Simmons, he really seems to get what makes Omni-Man tick. And it's funny how I've seen a lot of debates recently online that remind me of the debates that I used to have back in the 80s. But the big debate is, who is stronger? Who is more diabolical, Omni-Man or Homelander? And I think Homelander might be more entertaining, or might be funnier, at least as depicted in the show. But I think Omni-Man would reach right through his ribcage and tear out his spine and tear him to pieces. Homelander is very strong. Omni-Man is extremely strong. And the reason I find him to be so strong, or I think he's so strong, is because the Viltrumites, they get stronger the more they use the powers. As they get older and they push themselves, as they push themselves to fly faster, as they push themselves to hit harder, their power, like a muscle, continues to develop. Like, what is the upper bound limit of a Viltrumite? I don't know, but age is no barrier to getting much stronger. If anything, if you're Omni-Man's age or older, like, who knows what your upper bound limit might be to your power. And Mark is just now discovering that. And I thought one of the best scenes all episode is when Omni-Man tells his son, you're fighting with restraint, like you're tapping the brakes, you're acting like you're back on Earth. You have to fight like a Viltrumite or she is going to kill you. And it was incredible just how much heart and emotion this episode had. Like, perhaps it was a little excessive in the musical montages. There were 3 in one, like, 45-minute episode. But the musical montages did work. I thought the first 2 were probably the better of the 3, but that first one, we see Omni-Man flying around, it's just pure visual storytelling. And obviously, when you're reading a comic, you have word balloons, but in the essence of comics is that great visual storytelling. That's what, and you get to kind of control the pacing as your eye floats across the page. But I thought they did a great job at that. But they also brought the heart and the emotion. When Mark, he confronts his father, it looks like he's about to throw down and punch his dad right in the face, and instead he just hugs him. And once again, the moral and emotional complexity of this show, I think, leaves so much of the competition completely in its dust. Marvel's doing nothing that compares to that reunion between Mark and Omni-Man. I mean, Omni-Man, once again, we've seen him do such horrible, atrocious things in just season 1 alone, and here we have this tearful reunion, and I love that moral complexity. And the episode was just getting started with this reunion. We also get some great scenes where Mark's learning about the accelerated lifespan of this alien race. He meets this baby bro who's growing up very quickly, but back on Earth, we get some interesting stuff as well. I love how we get to see the Mer Twins, where for the first time in all their age-old debates about which clone is the older clone, who's the original, we finally have one clone who can prove without any shred of a doubt that he is the older of the 2, because he's got all these body scars from the previous episodes. And this is one of the best recurring villains. I love how he's strong as hell, or both of them are strong as hell, but they're fucking brilliant. And Kevin Michael Richardson, he's done a lot of great work on video games, and just he's a great voice actor. But I would say he's on the level of Clancy Brown, who luckily does appear toward the end of the episode. But the Mer Twins, they bring humor, they bring violence. Like, they are just great villains. And I love seeing how their story gets resolved. Actually, I should offer a spoiler warning. If you have not seen the post-credits scene, bail out now and go see it. This season did have a couple of post-credit scenes tucked away, but we get to see one of the Mer Twins wants to make a lot more clones, the other one does not, and ends up poisoning him, and I feel like that's a very fitting end, or a fitting way to press pause in their storyline for the time being. And we got a few scenes and a few other subplots, like we got to see Eve going totally psycho when this guy's trying to steal Robot's little orb, and we see how, because she's trying to prolong the fight and take out her frustration and her anger on him, as a result, she gets sloppy and ends up putting people in danger. And I find all of Eve's storyline to be really, really fascinating, because obviously she's got to find a way to let off a little steam without making mistakes as a superhero, but I've always been a big fan of Eve from the comics, and I'm a big fan of her in the show. And we also get some interesting scenes with Donald, who comes to the realization that he has been killed many times, and he even goes so far as to stab himself to see if he is in fact human. But he bleeds, but the knife bends, and I just found it fascinating seeing his reaction, like behind the shades where we can't even see his eyes, watching himself getting completely eviscerated by Omni-Man. And yeah, just this show is willing to go to such grim, dark places. It makes the big budget superhero movies out there seem so tame and so boring and so risk averse and so defanged and so declawed. Give me more Invincible, and I think this is kind of hastening the demise or the appeal of some of the big budget PG-13 shenanigans. But obviously the feature attraction and the main showstopper of this episode is watching Omni-Man and Invincible taking on 3 Viltrumites and some of the best goddamn superhero action that we've ever seen. And I think it reached its peak or its crescendo during this killer montage where they almost seemed like splash pages or panels from a comic. They had a little bit of movement, but it would just be like an elbow going into someone's face or a knee going into someone's nose. And we just got these great shots of just total, complete bedlam and mayhem, and I just thought it was awesome. I think my favorite moment, like the sound effects are incredible, but at one point, Omni-Man goes up against his opponent and he smashes his skull in, but it's like a half-squished watermelon, and the guy's like, kind of stumbling backwards. It's like, this is so fucking gross, where the guy's still alive with his brain being squished, but this show is willing to go there, and I applaud them for it. Right before Omni-Man removes that old lady's jaw and gets his back snapped by the other Viltrumite who got disemboweled. I mean, goddamn. I compared the action in the comic to the action in the show, and I have to say, like, thankfully and much to my surprise and delight, this show is consistently willing to go more violent and more extreme than the comic. And take a moment to appreciate that, because the trend right now in Hollywood is always to take something that is cool and turn it into something that sucks. Like, take, for example, Thanksgiving, the horror film that came out a couple days ago. You have the original trailer from 2007, which was super hardcore, and then they defang it and declaw it and kind of neuter it for the general viewing public. And Hollywood just always seems to think that the best way to make something accessible or mainstream is to remove all the qualities that made it interesting in the first place. And I just utterly loathe and despise that prevailing wisdom. It's not even wisdom if your shows and movies end up sucking as a result. And like whenever they talk about updating something for modern audiences, how come updating something for modern audiences always consists of making everything suck? Like, if you're going to update it, make it awesome. And I think Invincible is one of the only examples of trying to find a way to They've modified the original comics some in terms of like race swapping and gender swapping and that sort of thing, a few characters. But on the whole, they're taking what makes Invincible great and they're trying to make it even greater. And that epic bloody conflict ends on kind of an ominous note as Omni-Man is taken away by the other Viltrumites for execution. And General Krieg tells Mark, basically, you are worthy of your Viltrumite heritage. Go to Earth and prepare it for our rule. Like, you can either kill a couple thousand people to make it so, or when we show up, we can kill a couple of million people. And Mark's just like, sweet. Like, what a great option you've given me. And I won't ruin anything or spoil anything, but if you're curious about what's going to happen, Volume 7, I don't know the degree to which they'll continue adapting this series at kind of like a slow and measured pace. I imagine anything related to the Viltrumites will get adapted. There are probably a lot of other storylines and a lot of other characters that will fall by the wayside, but there are a few scenes and a few beats in this trade paperback which do deal with the storylines that have been set up in this episode. So if you can't wait for part 2 of Season 2, dig into it now. And if you fall in love with it, you've officially become a comic book reader and you can just continue your journey. But all I'll say is that there's some good stuff right over the hill that's going to make the fans of Invincible very happy. But I think I have vomited enough praise on this show for the time being. I'm definitely at risk of overpraising it, but it's easy to overpraise something that delivers when there's so many other shows and movies that fail to deliver. Like if you live in a permanent state of exasperation and frustration and just where it looks like all your favorite franchises are doomed to sucking ass from this point forward, whether that's Star Trek or Star Wars or Marvel or whatever. It's just a relief to have the Keeper of the Flame showing the way. And so I hope everybody enjoyed this final episode as much as I did. Hope everybody's looking forward to part 2 of season 2. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. And like I said before, I'm recording this a couple days in advance, but I will be back on Friday, November 24th. I'm going to see Napoleon. I'm going to see The Boy and the Heron. I'm going to be doing reviews and box office breakdowns. So there will be a little pause in this channel for the next couple days, and then I'll be back with a vengeance. But thank you again for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.